Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today I'm talking about album number 9 from BT, A Song Across Wires. Alright, I think it's about time we get into a little part of electronic music history I like to call the Dark Age of Trance. Basically, there was a period of time from 2012 to 2015 or so where it was just a really terrible time to be a fan of any commercial trance artists. Pretty much every single one of them released a flat, trendy, bland, mediocre disappointment of an album that added nothing to the conversation and had a fraction of the appeal that older fans of said artists were looking for. And I mean all of them. Seemingly no one was immune to this trend. Just to list off a bunch: ATB's Contact, Chicane's The Sum of Its Parts, Above and Beyond's We Are All We Need, Paul Van Dyk's Evolution, and to a lesser extent The Politics of Dancing 3, Armin van Buuren's Embrace, which I initially enjoyed thanks to its being a change of pace at all from his usual formulas, but soon showed itself to be a change for the worse. Tiesto's A Town Called Paradise, which wasn't actually that disappointing given how much worse the album he made right before that was, but it still counts. Paul Oakenfold released an album called Transmission as well, though it's similarly debatable whether you could qualify that as disappointing either given his standards. That's a lot of mediocre albums. And if you thought I was about to say that BT managed to rise above this trend as well, unfortunately he was a victim of the Dark Age of Trance as well, and we got this 9th album, A Song Across Wires, in 2013. Widely regarded as one of the guy's weakest and least creative albums. One that didn't do a good job of showcasing BT's particular style and talents, and instead fell victim to following trends of the time. I remember listening to this album for the first time in high school and completing a first-time marathon of most of BT's discography, hoping to hear more stuff like Movement and Still Life and These Hopeful Machines, hoping for something that felt like it really took me somewhere. But instead I got an album that I could only picture coming out of some EDM festival, not coming anywhere near the transcendent levels that BT's best work could hit for me. I was thoroughly let down by it on first listen. Though it did get a bit more interesting than that as the years went by. Even on that first listen, there were 2 tracks on here that did in fact hit that really high standard for me, with Skylarking and Must Be the Love. Even when I was generally let down by the album as a whole, I'd keep going back to those 2 tracks. Then later, I'd start to listen to the whole album more, wondering if there was anything else good I might have missed, and I'd get into other tracks like Stem the Tides and City Life. And I'd later just find myself in the mood to listen to everything in the album. It was kinda weird. I mean, let's not forget, first of all, that A Song Across Wires was not the first time BT made a really trendy disappointment album reliant on cliches of the time. Emotional Technology was a thing as well. Now, I don't consider that album to be bad despite its clear sellout move, even if I don't really come back to it all that often. I've definitely returned to A Song Across Wires more. Now granted, it had been a little while since I'd heard the album in its entirety, and when re-listening for the review I was pretty taken aback by all those trendy elements and how un-BT many stretches of this album turned out to be. And yeah, I can already hear the people yelling, "Dude, that's because he uses ghost producers!" Even though BT literally credits all of his collaborators as proper featuring credits this time, not just opting to put them in the album liner notes. Yeah, this is an album that has a ton of collaborations with other producers, once again. Only 2 tracks with BT's production all by himself, and it does show. But that's not necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. Unlike most of the Dark Age of Trance releases mentioned above, A Song Across Wires is at least well produced and sounds really good and well balanced. BT and company still got all these newer EDM styles to pretty consistently work well and create an all-around fun and varied listening experience. Most releases from this era are just boring, and A Song Across Wires is definitely not that. It's just kind of a mixed bag. There's some incredible moments on this album, some really good to even great moments, sharing time with a bunch of jarring or underwhelming moments. And if not for the super tight continuous mix that makes every track work really well with each other and feel like they belong in the same place, I'd likely keep a handful of tracks from this thing and forget about the rest. I am going with the mixed by BT version that is on Spotify right now. And even so, there's nothing here that's offensively awful. Even in its worst moments, it's just kind of okay. So may as well discuss these moments individually. So of course we gotta start with the opener, Skylarking, one of only 2 tracks here that don't have any featuring credits or production help, and not just the best track on the album easily, but quite possibly the best opener on any BT album. Maybe. There's some competition there. It's a pretty simple track, just really straightforward trance, progressive house, or whatever, with no strings attached. No weird sidetracks into other genres, no random showcases of effects, just 9 minutes of the kind of stuff that first got BT's name on the map. Albeit with a palette of synth settings that sounds much more modern than anything you'd find from the ESCM days. There may not be much to it, but the melodies are beautiful, the build-ups and payoffs are perfectly executed and really create this sense of soaring up in the sky. It's just this pristine and perfect production that had me absolutely hooked right from the get-go. The only thing that might prevent Skylarking from being my favorite opener to any BT album is the fact that it's not a very good tone setter for the rest of the album. Much like 13 Angels on My Broken Windowsill, it oversells how great the album following is going to be, and to a much more extreme extent than that track did. I mean, the next track, Letting Go, featuring Fractal, AU5, and Jess, is much more of an embodiment of my issues with this album. Certainly has a lot of great melodic moments, but the build-ups are trying way too hard to fit into this over-the-top festival anthem mold with all these cheesy Eurodance-ish synth tones. And the drop, which turns the whole thing into just straight 2013-style modern dubstep. I mean, it all sounds good and gets the job done for what it's trying to do. BT, of course, uses a bunch of stutter edits on the vocals in many parts that are fun as always, but it's the kind of track that makes you do a double take, like, wait, this is BT? It just feels really unnatural coming from him, seems to come totally out of the blue. I know he did hint that he might go in this direction and that he could pull it off with 13 Angels, but to go in with such a trendy, festival-ready approach still just makes this track feels like it's on the wrong side of the uncanny valley. Like, I guess BT can do this, I just didn't expect him to do it in this way. I feel like you could also put a fair amount of that blame on Fractal and AU5. It's probably more their track than BT's, but whatever. I don't know if it's AU5 or AU5. Maybe it's AUS. Similar thoughts with Tomahawk featuring Adam K, which combines the soaring progressive house tones with a Feed Me-esque electro house drop, although I enjoyed this a lot more than Letting Go. It's not nearly as jarringly un-BT, despite the reliance on styles that were trendier at the time. Both styles work well with each other, and hell, I think the electro house stuff is even better and more fun to listen to than the more plain-sounding progressive house build-ups. But hey, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for those particular styles. And there's City Life featuring Fractal again, as well as Korean singer Bada, which I think goes over far better than Letting Go, and feels much more like a BT track than that one did. Mainly because of the first 2 minutes. It starts out as this lush and instrumentally rich, down-tempo-ish track that kinda slowly builds towards those more festival-oriented tones. BT adding in lots of strange Asian harps and flutes and singing bowls, according to the credits. I don't really know what those are. But it sounds absolutely beautiful, and Bada's vocal performance, while probably wouldn't be as interesting if she wasn't singing in Korean, still adds a lot to this track for me. Now those first 2 minutes may be the best part easily, but the track is still pretty good even after that. It does eventually lead to this alarm-sounding, over-the-top EDM drop that, I'll admit, really took me out of the track initially on the first couple of listens, because it contrasted so much with where it started. But BT and Fractal at least ease you into those different styles, instead of just randomly switching over to them out of nowhere like on Letting Go. And I've come to really enjoy the track as a whole a lot. Both the ambient-centric sections and the EDM sections. Say what you will about that drop, that particular part may not sound all that BT-ish, but City Life as a whole is definitely something I'd recognize as a BT production, and it's one of the biggest growers on this album. Another track that sticks to BT's sound and style really well is Stem the Tides, featuring Tidy and Tanya Zagar. Now, I've reviewed Tidy's Collide project with Christopher Tin. I'm a little more familiar with his identity as a producer than the other guest producers on this album. And well, Tidy is already basically a less talented, less consistent, and less ambitious protege of BT's. His production style was already pretty heavily inspired by BT, and unsurprisingly, the two work together pretty well, and make 2 tracks that overall sound pretty BT-ish. Stem the Tides is undoubtedly the stronger of the two, structured really similar to Dreaming from Movement and Still Life, with emotional vocal performances, more laid-back sections with even some orchestral touches, but mostly focusing on more straightforward progressive house grooves with no shortage of stutter edits and effect showcases as I'd hope out of BT. It may not be better than Dreaming, obviously, but it's really not that far behind. I enjoy every moment of this track as well. The other tidy collab is Tonight, which happens to involve some flatter synth choices, and Jess's vocal hook is super repetitive. It's not an amazing track by any stretch, and probably more of a tidy track than a BT track in retrospect. He does have some identity. But I still really enjoy it. That repetitive vocal hook never actually wears out on me. The light, alright, tonight, I remember it always. And the two keep finding ways to keep me interested in the underlying grooves. As flat and generic as the synth tones may be sometimes, they change up enough to still be fun, and this is still one of the most fun and satisfying tracks on the album. After this point, the album kinda starts to lose steam a bit. Love Divine with Stefan de Broek and Christian Burns was never a huge standout to me, but I'll admit it is actually a major grower when I was listening to it for this video. Mainly because of Christian Burns and BT's vocals. The vocal hook and main melodies on this track are definitely the reason to listen to it, and are actually pretty catchy. And I will be this love divine. There isn't really much to note about the production behind them, though. While satisfying enough, it's pretty plain and nondescript. If not for the main melodies being as good as they are, this track would not really add anything of interest. If you want an example of how this track could have gone wrong, there's Surrounded featuring AU5 and Aqualung, which has a much weaker hook and is just kind of a meh production that doesn't really bring much of interest to the table besides, I guess, BT's having fun with the stutter edits sometimes. It's okay, I guess. Then you got the other BT solo track, Vervoeren? However you say that? Which, while cool, is also not even close to as good as Skylarking. I still like it a lot, has some good chord progressions, and has more fun with effects than the opener did, but doesn't exactly have a lot to it or really resonate with me emotionally as strongly. Maybe it's not fair to compare it directly to Skylarking, but I feel like they're similar enough that you can look at them next to each other and point to this as the weaker cut of the two. It's a good track, a very good one even, but not a great one. Then after that we have easily the lowest point on the album, Calling Your Name featuring Tritonal and Emma Hewitt. I mean, the latter's performance is one of the best ones on the album and almost saves this track, but it's otherwise a kinda plain EDM festival anthem, like a second-tier ATB track on one of his most recent albums. And this is a problem because this track is actually a remake of a really old BT track from the days of his first album. The original track was released in 1995 under the name Libra, presenting Taylor, featuring Jan Johnston, originally called Anomaly Calling Your Name. Really beautiful and hypnotic old-school trance progressive house cut there, and yeah, when you have to compare it to the original, this isn't even close to as strong. It's still fine out of context, but when you have to layer on it to being a disappointing remake of a better track, that just sinks it even lower. Thankfully, right after this, we get Must Be the Love featuring Artie and Nadia Ali, a much-needed return to quality and my second favorite track on the album behind Skylarking. Stretching on for almost 9 minutes, it's the most complex and dynamic track on the album, floating from sound to sound as we go on, primarily a warm and subtle piano-backed ballad with Nadia Ali's passionate and emotional vocal performance. This must be the love we speak of in those myths I read. But featuring side tracks that go for a more minimal techno-ish route, there's lush ambient sections with loads of twinkling bell sounds and glockenspiels too. Then there's some flatter stadium house sections, assumingly delivered by Artie, that still resonate with me more than most of the other flatter sections of this album, because they're not quite as over-the-top and overblown as, for instance, the loudest parts of City Life. It's there to be a payoff and still fits with the generally more subtle nature of the track, while still sounding like they could go down well in that festival environment. The whole track just really feels like it's taking you on a long journey, and stuff like this is the kind of thing I most enjoy hearing out of BT. At least from his dance albums. I wish this track had been the ending, but unfortunately we get the much less impactful Lifeline featuring Dragon, JonTron, and Senedy as our closer, which kind of feels like the equivalent of if these hopeful machines ended with always. I mean, this isn't a bad track either, and I can still remember the tune to it super easily. I need a lifeline, I need a lifeline now. But Senity's vocal performance is kind of underwhelming to me, the production is kind of plain in one note, and the track ends with the satellite beep that closed out movement and still life, which really did not feel deserved here. Lifeline is not Satellite, not even remotely in the same ballpark in terms of sound or even emotional resonance, and the fact that such a comparison is even being drawn felt borderline insulting to me. I guess BT was just that proud of it at the time. So yeah, that's A Song Across Wires, and needless to say I got a lot of mixed thoughts on it. Is this the best work that BT is capable of? Hell no. It's far too reliant on trends at the time and has too much of a focus on this kind of EDM festival sound to really resonate with me on the deeper level that these hopeful machines could. That album had far more dynamic and interesting production choices and was a lot more consistent. A Song Across Wires cannot reach that same height at all. But I guess it's not like BT was specifically trying to recreate the same experience. But still, nobody thinks this is the best possible work he can do. But by the same token, compared to the other work being put out by his colleagues, A Song Across Wires is still head and shoulders above the competition. It's far more interesting and engaging than anything Armin van Buuren's ever put out in his entire career. It obliterates anything Tiesto was putting out at this point. He'd pretty much given up making music anyone cared about when this album came out. A Song Across Wires doesn't even have any truly bad tracks, if you ask me. Even Calling Your Name and Surrounded are at least passable, even if they're pretty underwhelming. This thing mainly suffers from just ridiculously high expectations set by previous releases that just weren't met. And if I can take this album just for what it is, I still think it's pretty dang good, even if there are a couple of hiccups along the way. It may not be great by any stretch, but I still put it on every now and then, even to this day, even after most of these sounds have gone out of style, and I think it really says something that even at its blandest and its trendiest, BT can still deliver plenty of good material for me to return to. I think there's enough good in this album to get away with a 7.5 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion, you can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.